Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 1 of Creative Glue, where we explore the common bonds that unite creatives from around the globe. I'm your host, Scott Robinson, and today I'm joined by David C. Smith, founder and CEO of Plate Pros, cinematographer, and a creative force whose career sits at the intersection of art, engineering, and innovation. From discovering filmmaking in high school to building a career shaped by curiosity, David has carved out his niche, photographic virtual environments for film and television. His work has contributed to major productions, including Joker, Joker 2, Karate Kid Legends, and The Beast in Me, to name just a few. After nearly 2 decades as a cinematographer, David now leads Plate Pros, where he continues to push the boundaries of virtual production, blending storytelling, technology, and a healthy dose of problem-solving ingenuity. David, thanks so much for joining me. Before we dive into your journey, I'd just love to give our listeners some context, because you've built a career around something many people outside of the industry may not be fully cognizant of or understand. Plates. Could we maybe kick off by you explaining what the hell are plates and
Sure.
how are they used in modern filmmaking?
Absolutely. Well, first off, Scott, thank you for that intro. That was fantastic. I think I'm going to have to copy and paste that into ChatGPT so I can get a transcript and put that on every business card I'm going to make from this point forward. So plates are a very necessary part of modern filmmaking, but they're something that most people ideally have no idea happens. So a plate is usually a background environment that's used to give the illusion that an actor is in a location or doing an action that might be impractical or unsafe or for any number of reasons, why they wouldn't necessarily do it practically or for real. So what that often looks like in one of the areas that we end up participating in this the most is for driving work, where if you have an actor or actors driving in a vehicle, in the US, it's actually illegal for an actor to actually be commanding the vehicle while acting. We found out over the years that, number one, it leads to bad acting, and it certainly leads to bad driving. So for safety reasons, we've basically, with some exceptions for stunts and some of those situations, tried to limit the amount of time that it's possible for an actor to actually be in command of a 2,000-pound bullet while also trying to emote. So what we do instead is to fake it, to come up with ways to make it look like the actor's driving when in fact they're not. Sometimes that can be something called a pod car, where there's a stuntman on the roof of the car who's physically driving the car while the actors are down below doing the acting. That can be very effective, especially for stunt work, but it's a very specialized and expensive way to go. Sometimes we put the car on a trailer and tow it around through the city streets. That's also very cumbersome. It requires the entire crew to actually be riding along, which is a safety concern. And so what's started to be more popular in the last decade is to simulate driving on a soundstage. It used to be done with green screen, and now we do it with LEDs, where we surround the car with giant LED television monitors and then project my content onto those screens so that it looks like the car is moving through the world when in fact it's actually just sitting on a soundstage.
Amazing. Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to work on a small LED background screen, but nothing like the sort of stuff you see in Hollywood with that sort of basically a 360 environment. It's pretty incredible how it makes it so real. Certainly come a long way from Seinfeld. So
Sure. Yeah. It's funny. We used to in some of our marketing materials, we used to talk about Toonces the Driving Cat, which was a Saturday Night Live skit from the 90s, where it was a cat pretending to drive. And it was very, very obviously artificial. And we used to use that as the example of what we were trying to avoid until we got a call one day from Saturday Night Live to provide plates for their work. And we realized, maybe we shouldn't be bad mouthing their skit in our emails. So yeah, we had to get rid of that.
Just become clients.
Sure.
Fantastic. So, I mean, you've taken a pretty interesting path yourself, because, I mean, filmmaking wasn't something you mapped out from the beginning. I mean, it sounds like it's evolved following, your curiosity and an opportunity that sort of popped up. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, it was. I've always been involved in entertainment in one form or other. So even my first job in high school was working for the small television station that was part of our community. So I've always had some inkling that working with cameras and editing and filmmaking, storytelling was always going to be part of my journey. And what I didn't know was how that was ultimately going to land into a specific niche that I could really try and fully leverage and make use of. So I spent a lot of years working as an editor until one day I had a pretty negative experience with a production that was a high stress situation. And I walked out of the edit bay that day and went, you know what? I'm tired of being stuck in small, dark rooms with angry people. I'd much rather be outside with angry people. And so, joking, of course, most film crews are actually really a joy, but realized that editing, although I was passionate about it, I was much more interested in how I could innovate and how I could make my own tools. And editing had gone completely computer based by that point, and so there wasn't a lot of innovation. I'm not really a coder, so it's not like I could write new editing software. And I realized that camera was a place where I would have more opportunities to tinker and to engineer and to kind of play around with building things. And so I went back to school for cinematography, shot some TV shows, shot a bunch of commercials, a few movies, and through that process, ultimately ended up actually with the somebody from your podcast, so Stephen Fleet, who you've also interviewed.
Yeah.
It was actually, he called me one day. We knew each other. I actually helped on one of his parents' feature films. It was one of my first features that I was ever a crew on. His mom and dad are both filmmakers as well. And so that's where I met Stefan when he was 18.
Wow.
A long time ago for both of us. And he'd gone on to start working with some college friends on some visual effects work for a television show for NBC, which was the reboot of Knight Rider. And they, through some weird contract situations, came to a point where they needed to have the view outside the front windshield of Kit, the robotic car. So they were responsible for creating the animated heads-up display graphic for the car. But if you have the graphic, you need to see what's behind the graphic, which was, I didn't know it at the time, but that was a driving plate. That was the view outside the window. And at the time, I had my own production company. I had insurance, and they were in a panic that they needed this kind of very weird, special little piece of footage that they couldn't get otherwise. And so I'm like, sure, we can figure that out. So we went out and shot that, and that kind of sparked a little bit of an idea for me, where I was like, well, if they needed this, probably other people need this too. And I started doing more research, and about the same time, cameras smaller cameras were starting to become a high enough quality to be able to get this kind of content. And eventually I ended up deciding to create an array of cameras. So instead of shooting one camera going up and down the road a bunch of times, which we did for some shows, and cost a lot of money, and we had to have police escorts, and it was really cumbersome. We realized if we could get all of it in one go, we could do this a lot easier. And so that became the rig that eventually I patented, formed a company around, and then ultimately ended up selling that company. And I now have a new idea, which is taking those same idea of an array of cameras, but now combining all that footage into one massive file. So it's just been about 20 years of just trying to perfect and improve this very, very narrow band of filmmaking. My wife and I have a saying that we like, which is to be a big part of small things and a small part of big things, but treat them both the same. And so this is my opportunity to be a small part of big things. And so that's turned into kind of an ethos for my career.
Amazing. Amazing. I mean, when you look back at your sort of career path, do you think, you know, some of these things set in motion around your creativity? Was there something that sparked that where I guess you realized, I mean, you talk about you're always involved in film, but, or the TV station, those sorts of things. But was there something that gave you that indication early on that a creative pathway was your destiny?
Wow, interesting question. I've never really thought of it in those terms. I think even as a little kid, I was always very creative. Just in, I was the kind of kid that would self entertain, and I didn't need to have screens and TV. Like my mom used to always comment that she could set me in a corner with a inch of string and I'd find a way to make it fun, right? So I think that creative impulse is ingrained and has just always been there. I'm also a fairly curious person by nature. I would much rather learn a new technique or a new tool rather than just identify a need and then go find somebody else to do it for me. I'm much more interested in doing things for myself just because I get a lot of joy out of the end result. That once I've figured out how to make a certain thing work a certain way, that tangible thing that we created at the end is something that brings me a lot of peace and a lot of joy. And so I go out of my way, sometimes to great financial detriment, to try and go on my own and find a way to get it done in a way that I can manage. Um, and sometimes that can be fraught. Sometimes that can be a challenge. Like that's not always the smartest way forward. But what I find is that at the end, I get much more satisfaction from the result.
Yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. I mean, that's kind of the point of creative glue, is to sort of get these common ingredients and similarities that you hear in creative people throughout their journeys. So that's really interesting to hear, because it's certainly resonates with a lot of the stuff we've been looking at over the last sort of 3 seasons previously.
Sure,
And I
sure.
guess, thinking about who you've been talking about, I mean, that intersection of art and technology and problem solving. I mean, how do those elements, interacting together, help you with your approach to something new? Like, how does that fuel your innovation?
Hmm. Well, one thing is I think I find a lot of inspiration from other like-minded folks. So other people in the world that have the desire to bring something into existence that is a part of their point of view of the world, and is part of helping make the world that they want as opposed to the world that they inherited. So I take a lot of inspiration from whether it's people on YouTube or on podcasts like this, or other filmmakers, or just other people in the community that I encounter that are similarly interested in the act of creation. Um, I find community with them, and I find a lot of inspiration from seeing what they've created and feeling like, okay, I can maybe do that too. It's one of the reasons early on I realized that I was less interested in like chemistry or biology, because those where I'm interested in nature as a thing, but trying to understand how nature does what it does. For me, I'm more interested in trying to figure out how something that was man-made works. So that I lean towards mechanical things. I lean towards electronics because it felt like, well, if another person came up with this, then I should probably be able to break it and fix it and figure it out as well. Where understanding, DNA or chemistry or astronomy, like those are things that, while I find wonder in them, I don't necessarily feel like I have the depth to be able to fully grasp, the intricacies of it. So I'm much more interested in pursuing creative ideas and trying to break things down that were also man-made, because then I feel like I'm within my scope to tackle it. I'm not sure if that answered your question. I kind of think I went off on a bit of a tangent there,
I
but
like that though.
yeah,
And I mean, thinking about all the things that you've done, I mean, editor, cinematographer, you're an entrepreneur, an educator. I mean, have all of those experiences kind of shaped the way you show up in those moments today? Like, is it that combination of things that really gets you to today rather than one particular thing?
yeah, absolutely. And I think all of those different explorations in my life have a dramatic impact on really the problem solving in the moment. So inevitably something's going to go haywire. Something's going to go wrong in any given day, especially in production. It's one of the things I love about production is that it's a never ending series of problems to solve. That's kind of the whole point. And that's the thing that really attracts me to it. But it also is a place where it's okay to panic, but you have to panic in the right direction. And that's something my dad taught me and that he got from the military, where it's, fear is an acceptable emotion, but you can't let it dominate what you're going to do. And so when something goes horribly wrong, that's the moment in some weird way that I find is some of the most fun, because now you have no choice but to focus, buckle down, and work the problem. And so that's that presents some of the best creative opportunities, is when there's a real problem to solve under some constraints and under a deadline. So yeah, we've got to get somebody on a plane with a piece of equipment to replace the thing that's broken, and we've got to be back up and running by tomorrow morning. And the stakes are really high. We're not curing cancer. The stakes aren't that high. We're professional make-believers, but there's a lot of money on the line a lot of the times. And so that's where you get to really exercise those creative muscles and find ways to be able to execute. And you only, I think, have the confidence to do that when you have a wealth of experience behind you. If you've been in the trenches long enough, you can calm down and take a breath and find the way out without panicking. So that's always what I'm looking for.
Most definitely. So, I mean, when you're beginning a new project or you get one of those sorts of, creative problems or challenges, like where do you usually begin? What are you listening for in those early stages? What are your sort of go-to kind of mechanics to get you to that solution?
Sure. Because a lot of what we're doing is working to help storytellers tell the story that they want to in the way that they want to, I'm usually trying to understand what their creative intent is. And a lot of times you have to listen between the lines, and it's a lot of interpretation where you're trying to, because a lot of people will come to us with ideas of how they think things will work or might get done. And sometimes those ideas are right, but a lot of times they're maybe not seeing all the options. And so I'm usually listening for what the intent is, not necessarily what the actual ask is. And then trying to find, is there a way that maybe they haven't really thought about? And can we offer new solutions based around listening? Like at the end of the day, that's the main thing, is to just, the whole adage of we have one mouth and two ears and we should use them in a similar ratio. Like I think there's a lot of wisdom in that at the early stages is really just trying to listen as much as we can and understand the creative intent of our client, and then help come up with a solution that we think will maximize and get them as close to that goal as possible.
Yeah, and doing something that I guess is so innovative and different. Do you find that often there's those limiting beliefs by the people that might be briefing you, that they're limited by their understanding or knowledge of what is possible, and you're bringing something to the table that they didn't even know was possible. It's not that they thought it was impossible; they just didn't even know it even existed necessarily.
Yeah, I think that's very much the case. And you touched in the intro on one part of my background, which is that I actually paid my way through undergrad as a teacher. I had an opportunity to teach production for high school students at the same time that I was in film school, which was a very strange kind of mix of things. But that I learned in that process of being a high school teacher, how much you need to break down challenging concepts, or concepts that that come second nature to myself or to other people that have been in our world, but that people from outside of that might not have any understanding of. And so being able to present technical concepts in a way that's, whether it's using metaphors or trying to break things down and comparing them to other things that we think the client might have some understanding of, those ideas become really important. And so what I've found is that even now, educating our clients is a huge part of the job. And it's educating them on what the new opportunities are, what new tools have come online, and also how the way that they're used to doing things may no longer be the best way. And so, with the first generation of plates that we started 15, 20 years ago, we spent that time making that the industry standard. And now I'm going with my newest company and trying to change that and trying to reinvent the very thing. So my past success is in some ways one of my bigger challenges, because I now have to overcome that to be able to now show people, actually, yes, I know I taught you for 15 years that you should be doing this, but now I'm interested in having you do something different. So
Yeah, wow.
that's been an interesting journey, and one where it's like, okay, the education component is a tremendous part of the job. But that's another branch of creativity too. Is how do you communicate effectively these concepts?
And I suppose, like thinking about sort of, when a project's presented to you with some of those sorts of challenges, whether it be the actual project or this new one, like what do you sort of take away from that experience that helps you lead into the next one? What are the things that you look for out of each of those challenges that help you to solve challenges in the future?
Yeah, I mean, the so much of what we do is iterative, is building, what we did worked last time, but we also are very critical of our own work and look at every project and try and see, is there something we could have done better? Is there something that we regret? And with film, it's interesting because the end product is a moment in time that lives on. Ideally, if it's a good project, that people 10 years, 50 years in the future, 100 years in the future might still watch. So we're always very thoughtful and careful to get it right, because eventually the goal is that work product has a life longer than ours. But it also means that as we improve and as we iterate, we're always looking to every project as what succeeded, what failed, and how do we improve our process so that we can make sure that the next time it's even better. And that's challenging, and it's humbling when when you've done thousands of projects and you feel like you kind of have it figured out, and then something comes along and shows you that maybe there's some room for improvement. Then you have to be real with yourself and be willing to eat the humble pie and say, yeah, okay, we're gonna come up with some new tools, we're gonna come up with some new processes, new techniques, and make sure that every job is the best job we've ever done. But that's hard. It's hard to have. We work with an amazing team of people that help execute what we come up with, and keeping everybody in that mindset of iteration and improvement and never resting on our laurels is challenging, but ultimately I think the only way that you can stay at the top of your game.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, and away from, I suppose, the challenge, you've worked on a lot of major projects and films and all sorts of stuff. Are there any out of that really stand out for you as either meaningful or, really, memorable for you out of that array of things?
Sure. Lots of them. I would say almost every project we do has something about it that I carry away. The number one is I love filmmaking. I've always loved filmmaking. I'm a fan of film, and always have been. So the fact that we get the opportunity to, like I mentioned before, to be professional make believe, artists and technicians is a miracle to me. So I try not to be jaded about any of it. So whether I'm working on a student film or working on, an Oscar contender, I try to make sure that all of them have something about it that I'm really enjoying. Because otherwise it can be really tough. But in terms of specifics, both Joker films were highlights for us, for me specifically, because we got to do some really challenging new things. And Larry Sher, the cinematographer that brought us in on both projects, really challenged us with some hard ideas. With the first Joker, we did the moving environment for the subway chase sequence. We also did a bunch of the driving work, some of the bus work on the Queensboro Bridge, and but the subway sequence, we realized, and this was an example that I mentioned before, of listening for what they need, not what they necessarily ask for, because they asked for a normal array plate like we would usually shoot, and we quickly realized in the conversation that because it was stunt work and it was Joaquin Phoenix who was going to be doing, some really specific. His acting style is very specific, and the idea that we would have him needing to change his performance to match what the environment was doing seemed like the wrong idea. And so we came up with a scheme to be able to make a dynamic environment where the train could respond to the performers rather than the performers needing to respond to the plate. And now this is a fairly common technique, but at the time it hadn't really been done before. And so the production showed us a tremendous amount of trust when we said, we think we can pull this off. It's never been done before, but I think it's the right way to go. And they said, okay, well, don't mess up. And so off we went to figure it out. And as it turns out, we had the system up and running about an hour after the shooting began. So we almost got it on time. We were about an hour late, but we made it work and got it done. And that's now also become kind of an industry standard of doing. It was an animated, dynamic, responsive environment as opposed to something that was just a plate. And then moving on to Joker 2, Larry came back to us again and said, okay, that was great. Now we want to do something else crazy. And the result of that was ultimately creating a 17 camera array. Normally our arrays are between 5 and 9 cameras. And what Larry wanted to achieve required us to basically stack 2 arrays on top of one another. So that turned into a 17 camera array. So imagine trying to figure out how to get 17 cameras to all behave as a single unit, and then put it on a stabilized head on a moving vehicle, and then drive it around New York, doing stunts and crazy things. So that was a really, really unique engineering challenge, just to get 17 cameras light enough and small enough to be able to mount all to a stabilized head, and that ultimately worked out well in the project. And then a version of that is what we still use for all of our content now. So that gave us the push to engineer some new solutions that ultimately became our standard.
Yeah. And do you end up utilizing a particular brand of camera and glass and combination like that, or have you ended up having to almost engineer your own kind of hardware as such?
Yeah, it's all of the above. So we have really, really strong relationships with all of the manufacturers of different camera systems. So mostly Canon, Panasonic, and Sony. Those are the 3 manufacturers that we work with the most. And in the case of Panasonic, and this was for that 17 camera array, over the years, we kind of moved through multiple generations of Panasonic Lumix cameras. And eventually got to a place, when I'm working with arrays, we're buying them 10, 20, 30 at a time. So the manufacturers, thankfully, when you say, hey, I own 100 of your camera, I have some ideas. The nice thing is that a lot of times they'll listen. And in the case of Panasonic, they ultimately created a camera for our purpose. So it's something called the BGH1, which is this little box camera. And that's ultimately the camera that we were able to use for that 17 camera array. If they hadn't made that camera, we would not have been able to make that array work. Just because it was, when we went to the engineers in Japan, we basically said, can you give us one of these other cameras? It was something called the GH5S. That we used a lot, but it was a DSLR, and we didn't need a lot of the functionality of the DSLR. We didn't need a handle, we didn't need a battery, we didn't need a screen. So it was a simple idea, and I'm sure there was other people that presented them with this idea as well. So I don't want to pretend to take complete credit for the camera, but I basically said, can you just give me everything that is a GH5S, but strip away everything that you don't need and just put it in a little box. And then a year and a half later, they invited me to their offices here in Burbank and made a flourish of pulling a little napkin off of the prototype and said, "Is this what you're talking about?" And yeah, exactly. So,
Ta-da.
so that camera, that camera really became foundational for a lot of our arrays. We've since moved on to some other. So now we work with Sony. Now has a new Venice 2 Rialto mode, which is their big beefy cinema camera. But they've figured a way to take the image chip out of it and put it in a little tiny box on the end of a cable. So we can pretend it's a little tiny camera and I can build arrays with that little tiny camera. But then at the other end of that cable is the big camera that is the one that's being used to film the whole project. So we've made some really, really wonderful content using that. That's what we used for Karate Kid, where we did at the climactic end fight that happens on a rooftop, the helipad on the rooftop of a high rise. We actually had 10 Venice 2 8K Rialtos making a 360 array of downtown Manhattan. So when you're watching that fight, that's actually filmed up in Montreal in a warehouse. But we brought New York to that LED by shooting this incredibly high fidelity, high quality array. And then
Great.
our most of our library plates and a lot of the driving work we do now is actually using 8K Canon DSLRs. So it in terms of the camera side of things, we're always just looking for any imager that can create the fidelity that we're looking for, but in a portable form factor and one that's physically small enough that we can get a bunch of them kind of crammed next to one another to be able to make a tight arrangement of array. Yeah.
So tell me, how do you go watching film then as a consumer? I know from my perspective, I'm nowhere near as involved as you are, but I have a love for cinematography. I love the way
Yeah.
that it a shot can empower a story, and it could have been shot so differently, or not have those elements, or not have that type of depth of field, or that movement, or
Sure.
something. And it could have just been a static shot, and it would have been great, but it wouldn't have been brilliant, and it wouldn't have drawn me into the shot. And so I find myself often looking at film or,
Yeah.
or a show and watching the cinematography, or watching the way that they've edited, or the way that they use the music to create those elements. And my brain's breaking it down at the same time as I'm trying to be entertained, but I can't help
Sure.
myself. So
Yeah.
do you have a similar experience being so involved in how something so incredible can get pulled off by the types of innovation that you bring to filmmaking?
Yes and no. I think I consider myself fortunate in this regard where when I'm an audience member, I don't know how or why, but I can turn off that part of my brain that's picking it apart. Especially if it's a good story. If it's something that's really compelling, I can just dive into it and let the story do its work. And I'm usually not trying. I'm not trying to pick it apart. I'm not trying to say, "Oh, I wonder what that was. That a plate? Was that is that a VFX shot?" I'm usually on the first viewing, and this is part of my process, is I tend to watch things more than once, especially if it's something I really enjoy. I like going back to see it again, because on the second viewing, that's when I'm going to be picking it apart. That's when the technician part or the filmmaker part kicks in, and I put the audience member to bed. But my first time through, I'm usually pretty good at just saying, you know what, I'm here for the ride, I'm here for the experience, and letting it go with that. But one of the other things that I love, and I feel like with the loss of physical media, where we don't have DVDs anymore, I feel like in some respects we've lost some of this, but now YouTube, I think, is filling in the void of behind the scenes material. I'm a huge fan of watching featurettes and seeing after I've watched the movie, going back and saying, okay, show me how, behind the curtain, show me what you guys did. So especially if it's a film that I enjoyed, usually that same night, and drives my wife nuts, I'll come home and the first thing I'm going to do is pop on YouTube and look on the behind the scenes of whatever happens to be out there for that film. And then the analytical part kicks in.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, now that I've had the experience, I want to break it apart and figure out how it was achieved. We just saw Hamnet last night. I don't know if you've seen the film yet.
Not yet, no.
It's a historical look at the family life of William Shakespeare and what led for him as a young man becoming a playwright. And he actually lost his son, who was named Hamnet. And I guess the opening of the film, they say that Hamnet and Hamlet were actually somewhat synonymous names at the time. So he wrote Hamlet after the loss of his son Hamnet. And that's essentially the core of the film. And it's an incredibly emotional, really powerful film. And I came away just going, how do you make that film? I just couldn't, the magic of it wasn't in the technique and the technology and camera. And although the camera work is impeccable, the editing is sublime. The production design is near perfect. The magic of that one that I just couldn't wrap my head around is how could you conceive of wanting to tell that story and then doing so in a way that evoked, I mean, there was sobbing, open sobbing, men open sobbing in the theater. After the credits rolled, there was a gentleman 3 rows ahead of us that was still having like physical emotional reactions to the film. I'm like, okay, that's the movie magic that is outside of the technology. And that now there's no behind the scenes in the world that's going to tell me how you evoke that kind of response out of an audience. That's just masterful craft and artistry. And so those are the kind of projects that I really get inspired by, is when I don't care how they made it from a technical perspective, but I get marveled by the true expression of it. If you can break through the technology part of my brain and have it just be pure emotion, yeah, that's real magic. So
yeah. And it's interesting because, we're now in a world where there's so much technology. I mean, I'm sure you're exploring, things like generative AI and robotics and these sorts of things, and how that impacts our ability to tell stories, but it doesn't necessarily have that ability, it would seem, to replace that key thing you've just talked about, that function of what drove that concept in the very first place. What was it that led to that masterful piece of craftsmanship, which is not something that we can necessarily get from the technology, but how does the technology start to work together with that to allow that to come to life?
Yeah, I mean, I think the optimistic view is that hopefully the tools and techniques and I think generative AI clearly will have a role to play in this and basically all industries moving forward. And as a species, it's going to be part of how we interface with our world. But I think that authenticity and true human experience are going to become my hope, and the optimistic part of me wants AI tools to make it easier for people to tell authentic stories. What I don't want is to see a notion that machine learning is going to take over the creative process. Hopefully, it's there to facilitate the creative process. And I think, as with any new technology, we're going to be scared of it at first. Some people are going to embrace it. Some people are going to reject it. And then eventually we'll find how our humanity is reflected in the tool and is hopefully amplified by the tool. The challenge is, in the meantime, there's a lot of market forces at play, and there's a lot of money at stake at people trying to convince the world that these technologies maybe are more than they really are. And so it's then incumbent on, especially as early adopter, I'm one of the people I'm trying to be at the forefront of paying attention to understanding the tools, learning the tools, playing with them, breaking them, pushing them past their limits, but then hopefully communicating that back to the folks that don't have the desire or the time to take on that early adopter role, and basically help guide them to like, okay, well, yeah, it can do this, but it really can't do that. And maybe it will in a little bit, but here's where we are. So I'm always looking to try and help the people in my life and the people that I encounter to understand, a responsible way forward with those tools.
Yeah.
And then also trying to be actively a participant in developing the tool, and trying to guide them in a direction that I think is ultimately better for creativity. Not, I mean, I think we all thought that manual labor was going to be the first thing that robots were going to come after. We didn't. I don't think any of us could have guessed that it was going to come after the creative fields first.
Yeah.
And yet here we are, right? So it's interesting, but it does bring into question, what is art? What's it for? What does it mean?
Yeah.
And as society, how do we value it, and then vote with our pocketbooks as well?
Yeah, I think I said to someone, we all thought it was the blue collar, and then it quickly evolved to being white, and it suddenly turned rainbow very quickly and entered
Yeah,
into the colorful world
yeah,
of creativity, which was yeah, probably not what anybody predicted about it. So
sure,
it's a certainly it's fast. I think that's the bit that everybody keeps talking about is the pace
yeah,
of innovation,
yeah.
and that's probably what's causing people the biggest challenge to keep up with. So yeah, being at the forefront like yourself and trying to be on the front of that wave is a relentless task. That one. So
Yeah, I mean it's beyond 1,000 full-time jobs to stay ahead
mm,
of it. I mean there is no staying ahead of it.
no,
It's a tsunami that's crashing over all of society. So all you can hope to do is just tread water enough and find where it benefits you individually, and then just pay attention. And ultimately the other part that I'm really keen on is using it as an excuse uh, to reaffirm my humanity and to reaffirm community. It's uh, in person and even over a digital link like you and I are doing right now. These kinds of interactions, I think, become that much more important. It's very easy for us to kind of just fall into, I'm going to sit at home and maybe chat with my virtual girlfriend, right? Like that's going to do nothing but mirror back what I ask it to.
yeah,
And that's a step away from our humanity. And so my hope is that board games and barbecues and getting together with friends face to face, that the more these digital tools become ubiquitous in our work lives, that hopefully our personal lives are going to become a little bit more face to face and authentic. And coming
yeah,
away from the pandemic, we
yeah,
all got a heavy dose of what it was like to not have human connection. And I'm hoping that coming away from that, we can benefit from reconnecting again. And I think that's a critical component of this. And so I think the optimistic future is possible, but it means that we have to actively strive to make personal connections be at the forefront of our priorities.
yeah. I mean, and outside of all of your, professional life, as we're just talking about there, what is it that you find fuels your creativity outside of the professional aspect?
Um, it's interesting because there's trying to not have just a glib answer. My creativity is it comes and goes. There's ebbs and flows with it, and sometimes inspiration isn't there. And so when it isn't, those are the times when I really want to spend more time at home, spend more time with the cats, with my wife and my friends, and then take the energy from that and pour it back into the creative pursuits. So I guess really inspiration is when it's hard to come by. That's when I find that some of the best end results come out of it. Because if it was only easy, then I don't know that any of us would ever have the drive to just do it for the sake of doing it, right? So, and what's interesting is because my hobbies and my work, the Venn diagram of them is mostly a perfect circle. The benefit is that I enjoy what I'm doing, so I'm going to do it regardless of whether there's a client behind it. Like I love doing this stuff. So I oftentimes just do it for the sake of doing it. The danger is I can, the old adage of a work-life balance is virtually non-existent. I don't have kids. I think if I did, that would probably provide a lot of the gravitational pull of the life part of that balance. But for me, my work is my life, and so it's really just an exercise in continuing to strive and want to do better, and letting that be the thing that drives the creativity. Especially when it's like I'm tapped out, I don't have ideas, or I'm feeling down, or any of those things that, at the end of the day, I get to come into a workshop that I love and tinker and make things. And it's really hard to be jaded when that's the opportunity of the day.
Most definitely. No, resonates with me completely. Love it. Now, before we wrap up, we like to do this little thing called a fast five. So just
Okay.
5 simple questions, 1-word answers. Should be really straightforward, right?
Sure. Okay.
So I'll start off with the easy one. Sunrise or sunset?
Sunset.
Sunset. Beautiful. I think I know the answer to this one, but build it or buy it?
Build it. Yeah, build it.
I told you this was going to be easy, right?
Yeah.
So favorite movie? Now
Hamnet today.
Hamlet. I love that.
Hamnet for today. Yeah. Tomorrow it's going to be a different one, but today it's Hamnet.
Your best magic trick?
I helped a friend pull a piece of a bottle out of his eye, and he's a magician.
Wow.
I know that's not a 1-word answer, but yeah. So I'm lucky enough that my best magic trick is an actual magic trick.
Wow, that's super cool. And finally, order or chaos?
Yes. I like chaos because I like to try and bring order to chaos. So I feel like I have to say yes, both.
I love that. Well, look, David, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been great to hear about your journey and all your insights. That's all we've got time for on this episode of Creative Glue, but join us for the next episode as we continue to explore the glue that brings us all together. If you haven't already, please check out the rest of the Creative Group episodes available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And subscribe, and stay tuned to see who will be joining us next on Creative Glue.
Your ideas and my ideas will stay together like glue. 'Cause we've got the creative